Chapter 30, the respiratory and circulatory functions. The respiratory and circulatory systems bring oxygen and nutrients to the cells. They work hand in hand, so these systems work very closely together, all to maintain homeostasis. So the circulatory system transports blood and other materials. It brings supplies to cells, carries away waste, separates oxygen poor and oxygen rich blood. And if you look at this diagram here, oxygen poor blood is always represented by the blue, and then oxygen rich blood is represented by the red. Please note, this does not mean your blood is blue. Your blood is either a really bright red, or in parts, it's a really, really dark red. And your oxygen poor blood is the dark red blood. Oxygen rich blood is the really bright red blood. So they represent it by the red here, and then oxygen poor blood is represented by the blue. You don't actually have blue blood. If you look at one of your veins in your arm or something where the skin is thinner and you can see your veins pretty well, it looks kind of blue, but that's just because of the color of your vein, not because of the color of your blood inside that vein. Your blood is always red. Horseshoe crabs actually have blue blood because of the type of metal in their blood. They have copper in their blood. I think we talked about this before. And then you have iron in your blood, which is what gives it that reddish hue. The respiratory system is where gas exchange occurs, picks up oxygen from inhaled air, expels carbon dioxide and water. I think we all know this. And this diagram here is just showing you some common features of the respiratory system. So the sinuses, nose, mouth, epiglottis, trachea, and lungs. I think you guys know all these as well. The trachea is actually made out of cartilage, little D-shaped rings made out of cartilage, which makes it flexible. The respiratory system moves gas into and out of the blood. The lungs contain the bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli. Millions of alveoli give the lungs a huge surface area. Remember we talked about the more like little bumps you have or the little ridges, the more you're increasing surface area. The alveoli absorb oxygen from the air you inhale, which is the point of them. They kind of look like little grape clusters. So your bronchi branch off into the bronchioles, and then those branch off into the alveoli. Breathing involves the diaphragm and muscles of the rib cage. Air flows from areas of high pressure to low pressure, so that's how you breathe in and breathe out. So when you inhale, you're actually contracting muscles, and your rib cage is expanding. The diaphragm will flatten and move downward. But when you breathe out, your diaphragm relaxes and rises, helping to push the air out. Your muscles relax and your rib cage relaxes. So when you're inhaling or breathing in, that's like an active thing because your muscles are contracting. When you're exhaling, that's like when your muscles are relaxing. That's a passive thing. The circulatory system includes the heart, arteries, veins, and capillaries. Capillaries are kind of like the transition between arteries and veins, and they're very, very, very thin. They're actually just one cell thick, and when blood moves through capillaries, the blood cells move single file, like one blood cell will move through a capillary at a time. It's pretty tiny. Heart pumps blood throughout the body. I think you guys all know that. Arteries move blood away from the heart. Veins move blood back to the heart. So that's important to note. Capillaries get blood to and from cells. The three major functions of the circulatory system are transporting blood, gases, and nutrients, collecting waste materials, maintaining body temperature. And if you think about it, your body's pretty incredible because if you were to stand outside on a cold Minnesota day, your blood doesn't just instantly freeze, right? Your body works really, really hard to maintain homeostasis so that way your blood doesn't freeze, your body doesn't freeze, your eyeballs don't freeze, everything. All right, now we're going to talk about the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So gas exchange occurs in the alveoli of the lungs. We learned a little bit about the alveoli. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are carried by the blood to and from the alveoli. Oxygen diffuses from alveoli into capillaries. Then the oxygen will bind to hemoglobin in red blood cells. Carbon dioxide then diffuses from the capillary into the alveoli. So this diagram is showing you that. We talked about diffusion. We wouldn't call this osmosis because we're not talking about water here. We're talking about carbon dioxide and oxygen, but same concept. It's flowing down the concentration gradient. So you have carbon dioxide that's diffusing into the alveolus, and then you have oxygen diffusing into the blood. And where this is all happening is in your lungs, in the alveoli, just so you can keep the big picture in mind. And then the capillaries are these little like net-like structures. Really, really, really tiny. All right, there's something called the brain stem. And breathing is regulated by the brain stem, so you don't have to think about breathing, right? You're not consciously thinking about, okay, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Maybe you have to sometimes, I don't know. But breathing is regulated by the brain stem, and it's an automatic response. So the same thing with your heart beating. You're not telling your heart to beat. It just does it. So with the brain stem, these are just some different parts here. So this is called the midbrain because it's in the middle of the brain. This is the pons, medulla oblongata, the red part here, and then the spinal cord, obviously. And then where your spinal cord attaches to your brain, like in your skull, that hole in the base of your skull that's like almost dead center, it's called the foramen magnum. Respiratory diseases interfere with gas exchange. Lung diseases reduce airflow and oxygen absorption. So something like emphysema destroys alveoli, asthma constricts airways, cystic fibrosis produces sticky mucus. And there's something that I had read in an article, I forget who had published it, but they are thinking that the coronavirus actually causes lasting lung tissue damage. So that's obviously not something you want. Like if you get the flu, you're going to get really sick for a little while, and it's obviously a bummer, but you're going to get better, and you don't usually have lasting damage from just the common flu, or even something more complicated of a sickness. But with COVID-19, they do think that it causes lasting lung tissue damage. So not a good thing. And you guys probably could have guessed this, but smoking is the leading cause of lung disease. If you've ever looked at a healthy lung versus a smoker's lung, like chart in a doctor's office, it looks pretty nasty, the smoker's lung one does. If you look at them in a slide, like under a microscope, the healthy lung tissue will look like this. Obviously, this is stained with a dye that makes it that pinkish purple. And then this obviously is stained with a dye as well, but you can see all these black parts to it. Pretty gross. Now we're moving on to the heart. So there's two pathways that your blood will be pumped through. But first, the tissues and structures of the heart make it an efficient pump. So here is the picture of a normal human heart. If you're curious about the size of your heart, if you make a fist, that is about the size of your heart. And kind of like I mentioned in the last section, cardiac muscle tissues work continuously without tiring. Kind of a cool thing about the heartbeat is if you are pretty active throughout your life, you actually have a slower resting heart rate than someone who maybe doesn't exercise or hasn't exercised really throughout their life. And the reason you want a slower resting heart rate is because your heart doesn't have to work as hard. So they say technically you have a longer lifespan if you have a slower resting heart rate. And the way you can achieve a slower resting heart rate is if you have a regular workout schedule like throughout your life. It doesn't mean like you have to work out every single day and you can't miss a day or you're not going to have a long life, something like that. No. Obviously, like if someone's super healthy gets into a car accident and dies, like they don't really have control over that, right? But if you just exercise and eat well, you have a slower resting heart rate typically, and therefore are actually prolonging your life expectancy. We talked about the 4 chambers of the heart before, atrium, ventricles. So we have the right atrium, which is actually on the left side, and then we have the left atrium, which is actually on the right side, but it's because, remember, it's like a mirror image. So if you're talking about your heart yourself, your right side is on the right side. So your right atrium is on your right side. Your left atrium is on the left side. Same with the ventricles as well. But if you're looking at someone, then it's going to be opposite, right? And then we said the way you can remember if it's an atrium or a ventricle is because the ventricles actually make a V shape. And it's also in alphabetic order, so atrium is above ventricle, A is above V. Here's some major valves. So you have the pulmonary valve, which is this guy right here, allows blood flow to go one way and not the other. Then you have your tricuspid, mitral valve, and the septum is just the middle part that like separates the two sides of the heart, called the septum. So the valves prevent backflow of blood. Muscles squeeze the chambers in a powerful pumping action. Oops. Okay. The heartbeat consists of 2 contractions. The SA node or pacemaker stimulates atria to contract. The AV node stimulates ventricles to contract. So here's your SA node, and here's your VA node. Blood flows through the heart in a specific pathway. Oh, excuse me. So you can actually follow the blood pathway here. I wanted to make a quick note. So again, the blue is deoxygenated blood. The red is oxygenated blood. So this blue part isn't actually blue blood, but the blue is representing the deoxygenated blood. So this is blood that has moved all throughout the body, and the body has used up most of the oxygen. So that blood now has to get returned to go towards the heart to pick up more oxygen, and that's where it becomes the oxygen-rich blood, and it's just this big cycle. These numbers are showing you which way the blood is flowing. So like, even though it's a cycle, they're just picking a spot and saying, okay, this is 1, so it's going to flow through here first, then here. So you have your right atrium, right ventricle, and then it's going to come all the way up here, and then it's going to go to the lungs all throughout the body, and then it's going to eventually come from the lungs, and then to the left atrium, left ventricle, and it's going to go to the rest of the body, upper body, lower body, and then do it all over again in this big, almost figure 8 pattern cycle. This is just explaining in words those arrows. All right, here's that figure 8 pattern. The heart pumps blood through 2 main pathways. So you have the pulmonary circulation occurring between the heart and the lungs. This is oxygen poor blood that enters the lungs. We've said that many times now. Excess carbon dioxide and water will be expelled. Blood will pick up oxygen, and then oxygen-rich blood returns to the heart. So that is what this figure 8 diagram is showing you. This diagram is a little bit weird because this human right here is representative of the whole body, so that's representing your blood going to the rest of your body. It's just weird because the lungs are like out of the person's body, and the heart is huge. The lungs are huge compared to the person, so it's obviously not drawn to scale, but it's just showing you the pattern. So it goes, the oxygen-rich blood will go throughout to the rest of your body. Your body will use up that oxygen. The oxygen or the deoxygenated blood will then go back to the lungs, and the cycle starts all over again in this figure 8 pattern. And then systemic circulation, so the difference between pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation is where it occurs. So systemic circulation is occurring between the heart and the rest of the body. Oxygen-rich blood goes to organs and extremities because your organs will need oxygen. And that's how the oxygen gets there. It takes the little blood highway and picks up oxygen from there. Oxygen-poor blood returns to the heart. So basically your circulatory system is like UPS or FedEx. And the oxygen is the package, or Amazon. The two pathways help maintain a stable body temperature. Again, we're maintaining homeostasis here. All right, that brings us to the end of the first half of chapter 30. We will finish the rest of chapter 30 this week, and then next week we'll move on to 31. We are moving right along. So you will actually be taking a little mini quiz on this first half of chapter 30, and then once we finish the second half of chapter 30, the part 2 one, then you will also take another mini quiz. And yes, these do count as quiz grades. You can't retake them, so make sure you're taking your time. Don't text your friend for the answer because they're randomized, so they're not going to be in the same order necessarily. All right,